Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh-Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya studios. These are our top stories. Kim Jong Un heads to China's World War II victory parade, joining Putin as Trump eyes a future meeting. Meanwhile, EU defence ministers meet in Denmark as deadly strikes hit Kyiv and pressure mounts to define Ukraine's future security. And UK, Germany and France push to reimpose UN sanctions on Iran after diplomacy stalls. Now, North Korea's leader Kim Jong Un will be attending China's victory celebration next week, which marks the formal surrender of Japan during World War II. Russian President Vladimir Putin will also be among the 26 heads of state who will attend this event. US President Trump is not going, but said this week that he wanted to meet Kim, whose growing nuclear arsenal and support for Russia has rattled the West. For more on this, I'm joined from London by John Everard, former British ambassador to North Korea. John, thank you so much for joining us and for taking your time this evening. First of all, the North Korean leader rarely travels abroad. Is it a surprise that Kim Jong Un has been invited to this military parade in China?
It's not a surprise at all that he's invited. It's a slight surprise that he's gone. Kim Jong Un, of course, has thrown in his lot very definitely with Russia rather than China. And the Russians will be probably slightly perturbed that he's going to Xi Jinping's great party. It may be, of course, that Xi Jinping had to twist his arm a little to get him there.
And we know President Vladimir Putin, who you just mentioned, is also attending. So the world will really be interested in these seating arrangements and the behind-the-scenes talks. So what can we actually expect, John?
Well, the seating arrangements, I think, are predictable. The Chinese are sticking to protocol, and you will see them apply an almost mathematical formula to the seating on the podium. The real news is what happens behind the scene. This is the first time, I think, ever that Xi Jinping, Kim Jong Un and Vladimir Putin have been together. And I think for Xi, the temptation to have a trilateral meeting of the three will be irresistible. At that meeting, I suspect that he will do two things. Firstly, he will remind both Kim Jong Un and Vladimir Putin that China has power of life and death over both their countries. If China withdraws support from Russia, its war machine grinds to a halt. If China withdraws support from North Korea, its economy collapses. That'll be the first thing. The second thing is that China really does not like Putin's war against Ukraine. It's messy, it's disruptive, it's expensive, it weakens a key Chinese ally, and it costs a lot of lives. And one of the fascinating possible outcomes of this is that whereas Donald Trump has manifestly failed to bring about an end to the war in Ukraine, that Xi Jinping, who's got many more levers over Russia than Trump ever had, that he might actually move to do just that, perhaps even apply for a Nobel Peace Prize, who knows?
Wow, that's really interesting. So actually what you're saying is Xi Jinping now could possibly be the man that pressures Russia to stop the war in Ukraine. But I actually spoke to a Ukrainian MP yesterday, John, Oleksiy Goncharenko, and he said Ukraine can just not rely on China to put any pressure on Russia, and it's all down to Donald Trump to essentially stop the war. What did you make of those comments, or do you think actually it's Xi Jinping?
I think the Ukrainians are quite right. They can't rely on China to apply pressure. But if China decides for its own reasons, for its own interests, to apply pressure, then you are in a very different ballgame. And the kind of pressure that China could apply to Russia is many times greater than any pressure that the United States can apply to Russia. So if China decides that it wants this war to end, regardless of what the Ukrainians think, it is in a strong position to do just that.
And this is so fascinating, John, because we know Donald Trump is determined to get the Nobel Peace Prize. He's determined to end the killing between Russia and Ukraine. And if Xi Jinping manages to almost beat him to that goal, what is that going to mean for US President Donald Trump and the optics around all of this?
I think that it will be a very clear sign that the United States is no longer the sole superpower in this world, that in certain parts of the world, at least, that it's China, not the United States, that calls the shots. That will be a very bitter pill for America as a whole to swallow, and a very bitter pill indeed for Donald Trump personally. Depriving him of the Nobel Peace Prize would, should we say, sadden him greatly, but it will make a very strong political point.
But when it does come to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, China has maintained a neutral stance, if we're honest about it. But how hard would it be for Xi to maintain this position when he does meet Vladimir Putin at this victory parade?
Well, there's neutral and neutral, isn't there? I mean, China has been scrupulously careful in its public statements, but at the same time has quite clearly supplied Russia with very large amounts of money. Remember, it was China that bailed out the Russian banking system when it teetered on the brink of collapse a few years ago. And also a great deal of dual-use goods. A lot of the equipment that the Ukrainians find in Russian missiles comes from China. So it's not that neutral. And Putin, of course, knows this very well. He knows that without Chinese support, he simply cannot continue to prosecute this war.
And, you know, just a few days ago, John, I found it interesting. President Trump said he really wanted to meet Kim Jong Un again before the end of this year, that they had a good relationship. President Xi is obviously now hosting the North Korean leader at this military parade next week. Is this another signal to the US that China really does hold the cards here?
Well, yes, it is. But don't get too excited about a possible further summit between President Trump and General Secretary Kim. Donald Trump, as we know to our cost, has a habit of making off-the-cuff remarks that actually bear no relationship with his future actions. What you have to watch for is what he says unprompted and on his Truth Social. When he said that he thought that he and President and General Secretary Kim might meet this year, he was simply echoing the question that the journalist put to him, and then immediately started talking about a meeting with Xi Jinping, in which he's much more interested. I think the chances of a Trump-Kim summit happening this year or next year are frankly not great, and they will shrink and shrink as President Trump becomes more and more enmeshed in the complexities of his own domestic politics, and of course in the run-up to the midterm elections.
And just before I let you go, John, Narendra Modi is going to visit President Xi on Sunday, so China is going to be a really busy place. Is President Trump forcing a marriage of convenience between India and China right now, especially after those tariffs hit India?
The tariffs have infuriated India. I mean, pick up any Indian newspaper if you doubt that. But a marriage of convenience, it's not much of a marriage. India and China still have enormous differences, fighting over water supplies in Tibet. Remember, they actually came to blows not that long ago. So yes, they will talk. They will try to reach some kind of modus vivendi. But both India and China know that their economies are fundamentally and inextricably intertwined with the economy of the United States. And wriggle as they might, they can't get out of that.
John Everard, it's been a fascinating conversation, and I've really enjoyed speaking to you and getting your insights. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, EU defence ministers meet in Denmark on Friday to discuss a new round of sanctions on Moscow and possible security guarantees for Ukraine. Russia, however, has maintained that such guarantees should not be a precondition for peace talks. The EU's Foreign Affairs Chief, Kaja Kallas, says the bloc must increase pressure on Russia, accusing the Kremlin of mocking international peace efforts. William Denslow has this report.
Addressing the media at the conclusion of this informal gathering of EU defence ministers, Kaja Kallas, the EU's top diplomat, said that this week's attacks by Russia on Ukraine's capital, Kyiv, further proof, she says, that Moscow isn't interested in peace. They are merely stalling the peace process. That is why, she says, urgently more support for Ukraine is required. There have been calls by Kaja Kallas for EU member states to ramp up financial support for Kyiv. She says some member states have been doing that in the last few days. We've also heard from Ireland's Defence Minister Simon Harris discussing the issue of this 19th round of sanctions on Moscow that EU officials have been negotiating on. He says that that will be absolutely imperative as part of efforts to drive Moscow to the negotiating table. Another major part of these discussions on Friday in Denmark, security guarantees for Ukraine. What can be done to provide Ukraine with those guarantees that should any kind of peace plan take root, that Russia won't simply rearm, restock and come back with more acts of aggression in the future. Kaja Kallas said one proposal that has been discussed is the potential of EU member states sending training a presence to Ukraine on the ground in the country should there be some kind of ceasefire or peace plan going forward. That would mark a significant development. Also, what more the EU can do to help ramp up Ukraine's own industrial base when it comes to the defence sector too. Big questions remain, though. Is there the consensus across the EU to provide such security guarantees? We know a joint statement has been released by EU member states condemning this latest Russian missile strike. But the question is, the fact that Hungary didn't sign off on it, is there enough consensus to get all 27 member states on board with such security guarantees going forward? That will be a major question. We do know, though, however, that, of course, there is the coalition of the willing, so those efforts do continue amongst Kyiv's allies to provide those lasting security guarantees too. Another part of Friday's discussions, ramping up Europe's own defence sector. We know billions of dollars have been pledged for the EU to ramp up its defence capabilities. The question that was discussed between defence ministers in Denmark was how to put the money where their mouth is and ensure that these funding pledges result in tangible action for the EU's defence sector. William Denslow, Arabiya News, Brussels.
Let's take a look at some of the other stories making the headlines today. The BBC uncovered a Pakistan-based spam network posting fake AI Holocaust images on Facebook. Historians slammed Meta for letting users turn the atrocity into an emotional game. The Auschwitz Museum earlier warned of accounts copying its posts and distorting history. Now, India and Canada have named new ambassadors after ties soured over the 2023 killing of a Sikh separatist leader in Vancouver. Both countries expelled senior diplomats last year. Canada has appointed Christopher Cooter to New Delhi, while India has named Dinesh Patnaik as High Commissioner to Ottawa. An Australian celebrity crocodile wrangler has been found guilty of lying to police and attempting to falsify flight records after a fatal helicopter crash. A jury convicted Matt Wright of 2 counts of perverting the course of justice. The 2022 helicopter crash in the Northern Territory outback killed Wright's co-star Chris Wilson and left the pilot paralysed. A fight broke out between two high-ranking Mexican senators following debate on the possibility of U.S. military intervention in the country. President of the opposition party, Alejandro Monreiro, said on social media that he had confronted the Senate president because the ruling party had changed the agenda of the session to prevent the opposition from speaking out. And finally, New Zealand police have released a fresh CCTV footage believed to show a fugitive who disappeared with his 3 children in 2021. The video shows 2 people breaking into a grocery store. Authorities believe the man in the video is Tom Phillips, who had taken his kids after losing legal custody to their mother. Phillips faces charges such as aggravated robbery and illegal possessing of a firearm. Now, the UK, Germany and France have triggered a mechanism at the United Nations to reimpose international sanctions on Iran over its nuclear program. The decision comes after a failed diplomatic push by European powers to convince Tehran to resume negotiations with the US and fully cooperate with the IAEA. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio says Washington does support the move. For more on this, I'm joined by Jason Brodsky, Policy Director at United Against Nuclear Iran. Jason, always a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you for joining us. First of all, can you break down for us what the snapback process actually means?
Well, yes, the UN snapback sanctions mechanism is embedded in UN Security Council Resolution 2231, which endorsed the original Iran nuclear deal. And that allows a JCPOA participant to invoke the snapback sanctions mechanism. So in the event of significant non-compliance, Iran's regime has not been complying with the JCPOA for years now, and the E3 has given Iran every opportunity and every off-ramp to resolve this matter diplomatically. But the snapback sanctions mechanism itself expires in October of 2025, so only a couple of months from today. And so the E3 has to invoke that provision in advance of the expiration, and so that is why it is doing so.
And Jason, let's talk a little bit about October. And in October, Russia assumes the presidency of the Security Council. They are, of course, a close ally of Iran. So is the timing key here for the E3 bloc?
Well, I think that's why the E3 wanted to start the process at the end of August, because next month in September, South Korea will be the president of the Security Council, and that's a more receptive power to these initiatives than Russia would be. But let's not forget that it was Russia that originally basically came up with the snapback sanctions mechanism during the Iran nuclear deal negotiations between 2013 to 2015. It was Sergei Lavrov, who was still foreign minister, who developed this concept. So the whole point of the snapback sanctions mechanism is that it is not subject to the veto of a permanent member of the Security Council. And so that is why the E3 is invoking it, and Russia, Iran, China, and other powers don't have the standing legally to block the reimposition of all these UN sanctions.
And we know Europe has started the snapback process, as you just told us. But is there still room for more negotiations with Iran in the coming weeks, or was this kind of the end of that?
No, I think that it's not the end of diplomacy. There will be attempts to resolve the matter diplomatically during this window, which lasts for over 30 days. But I don't think that we should be under any impression here that there are happy endings to this matter. The reality is, unfortunately, there are no happy endings when it comes to dealing with the Iranian regime's nuclear program, and because it's a symptom of a larger problem, which is the Iranian regime itself. And Iran's regime views diplomacy with the West as a means of countering the United States, trying to eradicate the state of Israel. And so that is why it uses the diplomatic process as a shield and as a sword to combat any pressure against it. It doesn't view the diplomatic process as a way of resolving tensions to build a better future. The Iranian regime is all about countering the United States, eradicating Israel, and also expanding its influence throughout the region and rebuilding its proxy and partner network, which threatens the Arab world as well. The United States and its European allies, on the other hand, view diplomacy as a way to settle matters peacefully in the hopes of developing a more stable regional order. And so that mismatch in objectives will inherently result in collapsed diplomacy down the line.
And this was expected after the last round of talks between Europe and Iran. What reaction have we had from Iran, and how do you think the country is likely to respond?
Iran is characteristically being very defiant. It is portraying itself as a victim. But at the end of the day, the United States and the E3, through both Republican and Democratic presidents, have given Iran multiple opportunities and multiple off-ramps to resolve this matter diplomatically. So Iran has to own its decisions. I think that after the 12-day war, the Iranian leadership believes that it could survive the invocation of the snapback sanctions mechanism and absorb any impact. You see Iranian officials downplaying the impact of the snapback sanctions mechanism, saying it would be purely psychological in impact as opposed to truly substantive economic impact. And so that, to me, is very telling that the leadership feels that it could get away with the reinvocation of the snapback sanctions mechanism, because if it survived a military strike on its regime and nuclear program, it could survive the invocation of the snapback sanctions mechanism. But make no mistake, Iran right now is facing a deterrence crisis, an economic crisis, a water crisis, an energy crisis, a crisis of confidence between state and society. The list goes on. And so all this adds now a diplomatic crisis on top of that. And so the Iranian regime is quite vulnerable.
So we talk about the Iranian regime being quite vulnerable, and I do remember when the US struck Iranian nuclear facilities and claimed to have damaged a massive amount of their uranium that they were enriching. But the regime, Jason, did stand strong and is still going. So what is the answer here to try and improve ties between Iran, Israel, the US, and the rest of the Middle East?
Well, I don't think that's sadly on the menu, improving ties, given the nature of the Iranian leadership and its ideological outlook. It's all about managing conflict, and that is what we're going to have to be doing as long as the current system is in power. The Iranian leadership, namely the Supreme Leader and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, have no interest in a better relationship with Israel, have no interest in a better relationship with the United States. They have an interest in adhering and expanding on their grand strategy, which is countering the United States, eradicating the state of Israel, and also fostering regional hegemony through its proxies and partners around the region. And it views diplomacy as an ability and as a way to rebuild those terror proxies and partners which threaten not only the United States and Israel, but also the Arab world.
But also, Jason, we must remember something, that years ago, those crippling economic sanctions on Iran were actually lifted. And a lot of that reason is because, you know, they were going to put in Iran's nuclear program under the UN-backed deal, which was something which was quite successful. And Iran was sticking to its enrichment policy as far as we do know. But Donald Trump pulled the US out of that. And since then, trying to get back on track with Iran has been pretty difficult.
Well, I don't really think we were ever on track with Iran. I think that that deal provided a false sense of complacency. Let's not forget that Iran was in violation of the NPT, all while it was, quote, technically complying with the JCPOA, and that's because it had not cooperated fully with the IAEA on its outstanding safeguards inquiries, and that only became really public in 2018 after the Mossad raid in Iran that brought forth the atomic warehouse that Iran had been using and trying to store its nuclear secrets. So I think that we have to really understand that there are limits to what diplomacy can achieve here. And I think that what was going to have to really prevail at the end of the day is trying to counter Iran through diplomatic isolation, economic pressure, and yes, the development of a credible military threat.
Jason Brodsky, it's always great to have you on, and that is a very complicated issue. So really great that you came to analyze that for us. The White House has named Jim O'Neill, a Deputy Health Secretary to Robert Kennedy Jr., as the new acting director of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. He replaces Suzanne Montaraz, who was fired just a month into the job after clashing with Kennedy over vaccine policy. Her dismissal sparked a wave of resignations from senior CDC officials and growing criticism from experts who are warning the agency is being politicized at a critical moment. For more on this, I'm joined by Angie Wong, Miami GOP committee woman. Angie Wong, great to have you on the show. Thank you so much for joining us. First of all, why is the CDC in chaos, and what has triggered this wave of resignations and walkouts?
Well, it looks like chaos because that's what they've made it look like. There's lots of walkouts. There are protests outside the buildings, as well as, well, television crews. Susan Morenz refused to work with President Trump. She refused his agenda, largely because it was very anti-vaccination. Instead, she says she cares more for the public safety and public health, and that's why she decided that she was no longer going to be working there. This very much differs from the rest of the Trump agencies, where they fall into line with what President Trump wants. And what he wants is a complete revamp of the CDC. He's very ambitious with his plans to make America healthy. Unfortunately, it looked like Susan Morenz did not want to comply with it.
And what impact could the firing of Susan Morenz have on public health in the US and globally, as the CDC is considered the premium public health agency of the world? And also, as you said, Donald Trump wants to revamp the CDC and a more anti-vax stance is coming in.
And that's right, and that is remains to be seen. But we do believe that Jim O'Neill will be a great replacement. Look, a lot of these things turn over, a lot of agency heads turn over, especially when there's a new administration. Clearly, you can't have clashes with the president's agenda. And if there's one sticking point, which is that President Trump wants to review and perhaps get rid of vaccinations, well, and the CDC head doesn't want to comply to that, I think that's a real clash. And you don't want to spend your entire administration fighting. So this might be a good move. And given that the top deputies have also left, it's now a clean house for President Trump to fill in with his right people. I know that some of the early talks, especially with RFK Jr., who is the HHS head, they want to take food dyes out of our foods. They want to make our crops healthy. They want to make sure that sugar is actually sugar in our sugary drinks. So all those things are, they're gonna happen during this administration. You don't want people internally fighting you on these things, and that seems to be what the case was. So I would say give it some time, and we will see how this progresses. But no doubt, this is probably a good move for all parties involved.
And is the CDC at risk of actually being politicized? But we know Trump wanted RFK Jr. in this very position. So Trump really likes him. What's so special about him?
Well, it was just 1 year ago where RFK Jr. left the Democrat Party to join the Republican Party in support of Trump. So I think that the two men have gotten along since. RFK Jr. also very, very, very ambitious. He's long said that he did not like vaccinations, that he wants a complete review of vaccinations. Next month, he's going to be releasing a report likely to say that autism may be tied to some of these vaccinations. So that is something coming out in September. There's good room and reasons to question all these things. I applaud any elected official to review these things because we do have lots of health problems. And if we stay status quo, well, we're going to continue having health issues. Some of our biggest issues would be obesity, for example. And still we have COVID injuries that people are still dealing with years later. So all of these things should be looked at. I'm glad that we have a team in place. Hopefully the brand new team who's going to be able to accomplish all the things that President Trump wants to do in his second term.
And Angie, I want to talk a little bit about Melania's Trump Vanity Fair cover. It's been celebrated by MAGA and all across social media, but let's be honest, it's fake. And my big question is, why isn't the First Lady being celebrated?
Well, that is a very good question. I mean, she is a former model and she graces lots of magazine covers back in the day when she was a model. But when she became the First Lady under President Trump, people started having problems with that. I long think that the media is turning a new leaf on this. I think the smart ones, the smart outlets who embrace Trump rather than fighting him, they're going to survive this. Already Trump is looking at FCC violations for some of the other networks that have gone against him all these years, including ABC, CBS, and others. So it would be a smart move for media companies to start embracing the U.S. president and not just constantly attacking him. I think this is what Vanity Fair and Condé Nast, the owner, is trying to do here, is to say, look, we have a new editorial outlook on this. We want to celebrate the First Lady. Even if that cover might have been AI generated, it certainly caused a great noise amongst media yesterday. But no, Melania Trump absolutely belongs on every single cover. She's the First Lady and she is the American Queen.
And I agree with you. I always think she looks absolutely amazing. I love Melania Trump. We have seen her actually become slightly more involved in children's safety around the world when it comes to wars that are going on, which is something that's actually quite remarkable. But you also said anti-Trump activist newsrooms are extinct like dinosaurs. Do you think outlets like Vanity Fair just basically risk becoming completely irrelevant if they can't get past their bias against the whole Trump family?
Yeah, so remember, it was only a few years ago when the editor-in-chief, Graydon Carter, called Trump all sorts of weird names and accused him of having small hands, right? So all that has to change. A lot of our newsrooms here in America have become activist newsrooms, and so much so that the Washington Post had a walkout of its editorial staff not so long ago because, well, the editor wanted a change. This is our U.S. president. We can't spend the next 4 years going after him. We actually have to report on hard news. So that has to go away, only because it's now out of fashion, quite honestly, to be out of anti-Trump. Half the country likes him, thinks he's doing a great job. And why wouldn't you cover that? Why wouldn't you appeal to those readers, right? So I think that's what's happening now. I think the smart news outlets know to cover Trump and cover him, whether maybe just in an unbiased way. You don't have to like him or not like him. You just have to remove the bias from your reporting. Go back to straight reporting again. And I think that is slowly happening. But unfortunately, there's still a lot of activists posing as journalists. And those are the ones that we have to get rid of because those are the ones who are causing trouble within our news outlets.
And Angie, just before I let you go, I was speaking a little bit earlier to a guest that we had on the show about Narendra Modi, who's going to visit President Xi on Sunday. Is President Trump forcing a marriage of convenience between India and China with these huge tariffs that have been slapped on India? Apologies.
Yes, it certainly looks that way. This weekend, we're going to see the SCO summit, where it's going to be India, China, Russia. Absent is President Trump. But this is more symbolic than anything else. I mean, you're seeing three world leaders banding together, spending a weekend together at a summit. I think that is for Russia, China, and India to show strength and maybe a buddyhood amongst themselves, and maybe a band that's going to stand up against Trump. So we're going to see what President Trump and how he reacts to this. But either way, the 50% tariffs on India started this week. And certainly, having spoken to Indian media, they're not very happy about this. Their businesses are not happy about this. They don't have a way out. It almost forced them to, well, band with China and Russia. So we'll see how this whole thing plays out.
Angie Wong, it's always a pleasure to have you on. Thank you so much for joining us. Now back to China's Victory Day parade. Preparations are underway in Beijing for celebrations marking the 80th anniversary of World War II, also referred to in China as the War of Resistance against Japanese aggression. A major military parade set to take place next week is seen as a coming-out party for the modernization of China's military forces. Yana Li reports from the Chinese capital, Beijing.
Honor guards perform marching drills in perfect sync. Sweat's being poured into preparations for China's Victory Day parade in just a few days' time. For weeks, rehearsals have been taking place in the capital, Beijing. China's Air Force contingent is expected to be a key spectacle. The unit's undergone rigorous training in sweltering summer conditions.
We're confident that on September 3rd we will march through Tiananmen Square in the best condition to be reviewed by the party and the people.
Security's also been stepped up, with some streets emptied and screenings of people across the city. Beijing wants the World War II commemoration to highlight the role it played fighting fascist forces. But the parade next week is also expected to be a display of China's military might. Hundreds of aircraft, including fighter jets and bombers, as well as missile defense systems and hypersonic weapons, will be featured. Amid tension with the West, China is demonstrating how far its military has come. Leaked reports say unmanned drones and ships could also be on show.
That could be instrumental in any kind of cross-strait invasion scenario between China and Taiwan. So these are new items that analysts around the world are watching out for. The key storyline here really is China's rise, and that the military parade will help highlight the journey's humble beginnings going way back to World War II. And through that contrast, it's going to underscore how far China has traveled in the decades since.
For many people in China, the parade is a source of pride. At this children's salon in the capital, customers are getting into the spirit of the occasion with patriotic haircuts. This boy's having a tank shaved into the back of his head.
I think for the children it also has great educational meaning. For our family, from the perspective of the motherland, a stronger China means we won't be bullied anymore.
Victory Day celebrations will take place just after China's biggest diplomatic huddle of the year. More than 20 foreign leaders are set to attend the annual summit of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, seen as an alternative to the Western-led international order. Yana Li, Arabiya English, Beijing.
Let's take a look at the top sports news now. World number one tennis player Jannik Sinner reached the US Open third round, winning against Alexei Popyrin. He has now won 23 consecutive matches at hard-court Grand Slams. Sinner lost only 4 games in his first round match and broke Popyrin's serve early in each set. He is the defending US champion and 2-time defending Australian Open champion. Jose Mourinho has been sacked as football's manager just over a year after taking charge of the Turkish club. His dismissal came 2 days after they were knocked out of the Champions League playoffs by Benfica. Despite guiding the team to second place in the league, Mourinho's spell was marked by controversy and poor results in key matches. Talks over his compensation package remain ongoing. A reminder of our top stories. Kim Jong Un heads to China's World War II victory parade, joining Putin as Trump eyes a future meeting. Meanwhile, EU defence ministers meet in Denmark as deadly strikes hit Kyiv and pressure mounts to define Ukraine's future security. And UK, Germany and France push to reimpose UN sanctions on Iran after diplomacy stalls. And that's all from us on W News. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and, of course, follow us on X. The Riz Khan Show will be coming up next. Plus, we'll be back in a couple of hours with W News Extra. Goodbye and thank you for joining us.